Hi, I'm Colin Sutherland, Executive Vice President of Geotab. Once again, we're here for another exciting episode of Connected with Geotab, where I'm interviewing various executive guests on trending topics. Our goal with this podcast, as you know, is to create a connected community where listeners can locate a variety of topics and connect ideas for this fast-paced business climate that we find ourselves in. And each episode really is focusing on a unique different topic, a different leader. And today we're very excited to have Sherry Calkins, our Vice President of Strategic Partners, with us. Welcome, Sherry.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here.
Sherry, we've worked together for a few years now, and this is certainly not about our working relationship, because prior to our working relationship, you have a very rich background in fleet. And I thought it would be interesting just to sort of talk in terms of the evolution of your career. How did you get started in the fleet industry, and let's sort of talk about your evolution over the years and how it evolved to the present day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly has evolved. I think as most, I didn't set out to be in the fleet industry. It just happened by chance. And I'm so glad that it did, because it's certainly been a wonderful 22 plus years that I've been in this industry. But out of college, I started at a dealership. I was a customer relations manager. And it kind of gave me that experience in how to work with multiple types of vehicles, working with the maintenance department, overseeing preventative maintenance. And then a job came available at the university. I lived in a college town at that time. So, of course, everyone's goal was to work at the university. So Penn State University was my first true fleet management position. I was an operations manager. We had about 1,500 vehicles, and we functioned as an internal leasing department. So we really were a fleet management company within the university. We sourced all vehicles. We did everything from acquisition to maintenance, fueling, to disposal. We would have permanent assigned vehicles as well as a motor pool that you could rent, kind of like a car rental agency. And that was just an amazing experience. That's where I really had my first mentor in the fleet industry, and that was Bruce Yonkin, who was my manager at the time. He had about 20 years in fleet. He was very involved in the National Association of Fleet Administrators, which is one of the professional organizations that a lot of fleet managers belong to. They also have a certification around fleet management as well. And early on, he encouraged me to get involved and to stay involved. It is a fast-changing industry. It can be a fast-changing industry. Some things remain the same over the years, but things do evolve and change. And I'm so glad that I had that from the beginning, because it really did get me invested into the industry and networking and mentoring with other people. So I was at Penn State for about 3.5 years, and then an opportunity came available in Ohio, at Ohio University. So I moved there to be the director of transportation. At the time, it was my dream job. I enjoyed it so much, and about 4 years into it, they gave me parking. So you can imagine what parking is like on a university setting. I love the transportation segment, but the parking really took the bulk of my responsibilities and my time, which was less interesting to me than the fleet side. So long story short, I really wanted to branch out. I had been in government fleet management in the university segment, for close to 10 years. And an opportunity came to move into the corporate segment, Wendy's International, the restaurant chain. You may be familiar with it. And at the time, we had 5 different franchises, and I was the international fleet manager. So I managed the fleet on a global perspective. I did have resources in other countries as well. I managed directly the U.S., Canada, and Mexico fleet. And then I had resources in other markets that would help manage that. But that was really interesting, because it kind of shifted from being an internal operation where we handled everything, cradle to grave kind of. And then going into the corporate segment, it really got me understanding leasing, understanding total cost of ownership a little differently than what you would in a university segment, and really getting into the data. We really focused on data and statistics at Wendy's, more so than what we did in a university setting. So that's what really got me into data and into really using that to run my operation efficiently. About 1.5 years into that job, unfortunately for me, I guess at the time, or maybe fortunately, because it led me into my other career, which is on the SaaS side. So selling software solutions to the fleet industry, fleet mobility industry. And that is truly my passion. I thought it was being in fleet management, but what I've realized is consulting with fleets, using data to help them get actionable insight into what's happening with their fleet and to manage it in an elevated level is just really fascinating to me. So here I am 5 years at Geotab, diving into data with our customers, with our partners, with our vast ecosystem. And it's just been an amazing experience. And I feel very fortunate to be where I am today and to see the success that Geotab has had. And more importantly, the impact that we have to the industry and to our partners.
You raised a couple of interesting things. I want to come back to them later on about motor pool and parking, because I imagine that back then that was very low tech in terms of motor pool and parking. But I think looking forward, it's going to be about to become very high tech. But let's talk about women in fleet management. As the person that was in the fleet industry, over 10 years ago, you were probably one of the earlier pioneers, quite frankly, as a woman in this very male-dominated fleet management industry. So how have you seen maybe that evolve over the last 10 years? What was it like as an early pioneer, as a woman in fleet management? And then how have you seen that evolve?
Yeah, I think that there's been a greater focus of women in fleet and helping to mentor them and really lift them up in the industry. When I started, I was in my mid-20s, and I worked in a predominantly male industry. I had union employees. I had maintenance mechanics that were, primarily all male dominated. And I was challenged, especially coming into a fleet position. At that time, 20 years ago, it was really about maintenance and understanding how to turn a wrench and understanding, the intricacies of a vehicle, how it operates, oil changes, things along that nature. It's evolved into data. So I was challenged. But as I mentioned earlier, I really started in the industry with a strong male mentor that really helped open doors for me, gave me the confidence in understanding my value, and really helped guide me to get involved in the industry. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about the fleet and mobility industry is the networking. One interesting thing that happened when I went to Wendy's, then you talk about women in fleet. I got involved with the Association of Fleet Leasing Administrators, AFLA's the acronym for that. And they do have a women in fleet management program. It is all about mentoring, and it's about not just leadership in work, but also work-life balance, which sometimes we all struggle with, not just women, men as well. And I really learned some key skills early on in my career that helped me balance, gave me confidence, and really gave me a network that I could build on with other women. I started as a mentee, being mentored, by other people that had more experience, and now it's flipped. Now I'm the mentor. And I have several mentees that I work with, helping them navigate, network, and understand the industry a little better. It's been a fascinating experience. I think women in fleet management is definitely evolving. And one thing that I'm really happy to be a part of at Geotab is we're helping to evolve that in Canada. So right now, Women in Fleet Management is predominantly a U.S. organization, and we're starting a chapter in Canada. So we'll be expanding there. And then the goal is eventually to move it into our other sister organizations that we work with and continue to grow that globally.
That's terrific, Sherry. Yeah, and when you talk about work-life balance, here we are in June 2020, and I think all of us, every person on the planet has tried to define for themselves what work-life balance is defined as because of this COVID-19 current situation. Of course, this podcast, we hope will be listened to 2 years from now, and I think it's a moment in time when we reflect back on June 2020, that how all of us are adjusting our own lives, our work lives, our personal lives, and trying to find those times. And it's terrific that I think you've been able to do that. I think you've been a great mentor even to some of our current internal employees on working through that work-life balance in the last 90 days. I just want to thank you for that. We'll get to again motor pool and parking later on in this discussion, but let's talk about safety, because I know that is one of your passions as well. Outside of AFLA, the Fleet Leasing Association that you're a member of, and you're also on the Women in Fleet Management committee or group with AFLA. Let's talk about specifically safety. There is another association that you're passionate about, the National Employer Traffic, and help me with NET. What is
Network of Employers for Traffic Safety.
Yeah. It's a great association of people that are focused on improving, whether it's a Vision Zero strategy or keeping people safe behind the wheel, but also keeping pedestrians safe. Let's talk about safety in your perspective of where we're at today in 2020. What technologies are behind the wheel that fleet should be aware of, maybe should be specifying. What is your overall scope when you talk about fleet and the topic of fleet safety? What comes to mind?
Gosh, I think, immediately what comes to mind is we should be doing better than what we are, especially with all the advancement in technology in the vehicle, right? These built-in ADAS systems, lane departure warnings. We all know the effects of speeding. You're more likely to be involved in a crash if you're speeding. Distracted driving, we're all aware of it, but yet we continue to see our crash rates climb. We continue to have these types of crashes within our fleet industry where these drivers are trained, they have policies, they're constantly being reiterated about safety in the vehicle, but yet we still are distracted. So, we have a long way still to go, I feel. I think autonomous vehicles can help in that, but we're a long way off until that becomes the norm, on the roads and especially globally. This is not just, a U.S. problem. This is a global problem. And it's a very severe problem. It's somewhat pandemic when you look at it across the globe. See how, fatalities continue to increase, crashes and the severity of the crashes continue to increase. So I think awareness is key. But when you talk about fleets and how you really enforce safety, it really starts with leadership. And it also needs to have a strong policy behind it. So without leadership, reiterating that, showing support behind it, and then having the policy that can help dictate and back up, what you're trying to accomplish. Those are really the key starting points. And if you have both of those, you continue to train, you continue to get your drivers engaged. And more importantly, you look at the data. What is the root cause? What is causing the crashes? Why are your drivers, speeding in the morning? Why are they distracted? What is happening? And really, to get to the root of what's happening, you need data. You need that intelligence to figure it out. So I think even though we have a long way to go, we're at a time right now where the technology is here, it's available, and it can truly, truly help fleets increase their safety, decrease those crashes, and ultimately decrease their spend and what they're spending on insurance and crashes and bent metal and all of that to repair a vehicle. I think fleets are working hard at it, but every fleet that I talk to as well, they still want to do better. And just when they think that they did good, something happens, right? And their numbers go skewed again. So it's a constant area that you need to stay very focused on, and you need to ensure that you're, engaging managers, you're engaging the fleet drivers in particular, and making sure they understand the policy, that they have resources available to them as well for training and to understand their actions. I think when you think of technology, probably one of the most important things that we can do with technology is to stop it in real time. So through telematics, through in-cab coaching, those are ways that you can really help, decrease the level of severity of crashes and also make your drivers more safe on the road.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted policy because I think this is one of those topics where often people think that you can technology your way to a safer vehicle environment. And you just can't, right? So we have to acknowledge that while data and in-cab coaching is a tool to help address, driver safety, it has to start with a cultural, I think, underswell, or at least a top-down management style, which is what you were saying, right? So it's culture, it's policy, it's alignment in a company towards we're going to have a safety culture here, and we figure those things out, and then you say, well, what tools can we apply to help reinforce our safety culture? And that's where maybe a telematics solution or in-cab coaching comes in. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about you can't, always use technology to get your way out of it. And it's so true. I mean, backup cameras are a prime example. Since I think 2017, we've had backup cameras in every vehicle manufactured, but yet rear end backing collisions continue to go up in fleets. In part because we get reliant sometimes on technology. We're not, doing the full visual around the vehicle, looking left, looking right before you put that vehicle in reverse. Technology can certainly help, but it is not the be all end all in a safety program. It certainly is layers of approaches. I think one thing too that's been, really game changing in the industry is gamification. Getting the drivers involved. Everyone wants to be the top on the leaderboard. Everyone wants to be recognized for good work, not for the bad. So I really have seen effective solutions as it comes to gamification and implementing that into fleet practices. It really does change the driver behavior.
What's the association that you've seen between safe driving and climate change or sustainability? Is it probably within a business, if we're talking to the fleet manager, it might be the person that's responsible for procuring the asset and making sure that if a vehicle does get into a collision, that it's repaired properly, effectively, and on time. The custodian of the fleet budget is very common, the old traditional definition of fleet manager. But then you've got the safety concern, which is a driving reason for businesses to want to get into solutions and tools like telematics. And then there's this, sustainability initiatives that many companies have to improve their greenhouse gas and climate change outlook. So, yeah, have you often seen that these are three distinct people, or often one manager that is the right person that has all three responsibilities? And how do you see maybe that evolving?
Very interesting question. To be honest, it's across the board. I don't think there is one common way that that's handled. What I tend to see, especially in the larger fleets, that the safety aspect is typically under the risk and safety or compliance division. And then the management of the maintenance, for instance, or the claims and subrogation is handled by another department. So sometimes they are separated. And it's critically important that, the fleet manager or the director or the vice president that's over, compliance, risk, and safety, that they communicate and that they all, are marching to the same, end goal that they want to have, and that they're communicating regularly, that they're diving into the reasons why. What's the root cause of these crashes? Where are they coming from? How can we continue to have data to help drive change? So it's not always the fleet manager that's responsible, for safety and the outcome of that. It truly is usually a collective effort.
You've just wrapped up the first large chapter of about a 2.5-month study, what we called pulse checks, industry pulse checks, right? And that was designed because we understand as COVID-19 ground many businesses to a halt, some businesses were continuing to operate as essential services. And that's, great. And we saw, we were able to look at all those fleets that were performing, either staying at home or on the road. But of course, the concern, here we are again, June 2020, the concern is how are industries going to recover? And are they going to lose focus on safety and sustainability while they're recovering? Or are they just going to be fully into the productivity and the asset management? Maybe you could just, verbalize in a glimpse, what have you seen in your first examination of the pulse checks? And if you had a crystal ball looking in the next, quarter or two, do you have any insight in terms of broad industry growth? What industries have been affected negatively? Which ones do you see recovering? Any thoughts on that you could share?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts come to mind. I'll hit first on the sustainability because it is really important, and it's still very important to fleets. I had several fleets during our pulse checks that we talked to that this is still very much, a top priority for them. And even more importantly, they wanted to look at, how have just working from home and not having, daily commutes to and from work, how has that impacted their sustainability goals? So that is still being, looked at. It is still a top priority among many fleets. So that hasn't changed during this. And even more, they're looking at ways to how they can continue to maybe work from home one day a week. And what is that impact to the environment? And how does that impact their sustainability goals? So very much still part of the conversation and top of mind to most fleets that we've engaged with through these pulse checks. When you talk about industries who've been impacted, it really was all across the board. In particular, of course, I think we all recognize that, car rental, car share, and ride share have been heavily impacted without travel, without people even, traveling personally, let alone the business need, drastic reductions in that area. But some creative things that have happened as a result of that, sometimes through crisis comes opportunity. And what we've seen in that industry is some of the last mile delivery companies have reached out to the rideshare and car share companies. They understand and recognize that these drivers are idle, the vehicles are idle. They had a demand increase rather than going out and hiring a bunch of new drivers or trying to source vehicles at a time where things just weren't moving. They used the car share industry. So I thought that was a remarkable way of how, the industry worked together, and they found one industry that was struggling, and how can we bring that in? There was another example of that in the distribution segment, where one of the large distribution companies had an increase as well. And they reached out to another trucking company that they weren't moving. They weren't on the roads. Their wheels weren't turning, and they knew that they had idle trucks. They needed the trailers. So they put those drivers back to work with that other company and work together. We've really seen some creative ways of industries that are struggling, and how others that are actually faring well in this time have increased demand, are using those other resources and industries to help get the job done. One that I think I found really interesting was around healthcare. When we started talking, not just with hospitals and that, but also the suppliers to the healthcare industry, I think we all kind of immediately thought that this is an industry that is thriving right now. Come to find out, there was a lot of hardship in that industry. Doctor offices were closed. Elective surgeries were postponed. So although there is an increase for the COVID side of the business, they did have some big reductions in their operations, which impacts, of course, their revenue too. So that was an industry I think that we were a little surprised to see how they were impacted on a revenue scale, and even some layoffs and some furloughs in that industry. We are seeing rebounding. We are seeing companies come back to work, which is great. We're seeing fleets utilization start to pick up too across all markets. So in all industries. So that's a really good sign. We hope that trend continues. But I will say overall, whether your fleet was, completely utilized during this time, or if it was severely impacted and you had all your vehicles idle, everyone is looking at ways to cut costs, to make sure that their vehicles are being utilized fully and that they don't have waste. So one way, of course, to do that is to use technology. So I did hear very consistently that technology is an enabler. And technology is needed now more than ever. And more importantly, insight from the data is needed now more than ever. And it's going to continue to be needed so we can help fleets, and more importantly, help their businesses get out of the situation that they're in. So I'm really, looking forward to working with our partners, working within our ecosystem to bring new technology solutions to these customers and continue to help them be more efficient, utilize their fleets better, and be safer on the roads.
I think you mentioned there almost the idea of almost a motor pool.
Yeah,
for struggling, they went out. And I just talk briefly here about motor pool, because but back in the day of motor pool, you probably had some cabinet with keys hanging on it, and you signed out a car and here's your keys. Today, car sharing is something that I think is on the increase, whether on the personal life side, maybe it's still on the university campus environment. Any thoughts or anything you've heard recently about motor pool or car share?
Yeah, again, through crisis comes opportunity, and not only in the fleet management companies are they looking at this, but even within work parks, even within industries of their own, they're looking at ways of how they can work together. Utilization, as I said, is a big thing. People do not want to have idle vehicles. So if we don't want to have these idle vehicles, how do we make sure that we're able to have some type of inventory of vehicles when that's needed? And technology does play a key role in that. So you talk about looking to the future. I do see more of what we're calling fleet share, right? Where fleets will share resources. Maybe you don't need a box truck every day of the week. Maybe you only need it once or twice a month, and you can, fleet share with a company down the road that has box trucks. Sometimes many of them are sitting idle. We're seeing more of those discussions happening, and technology will enable that. Being able to remotely lock and unlock vehicles. We have some of that technology now. It's being utilized in certain industries, but this is something I definitely see being an uptick and more fleets getting into fleet share and working with other fleets and businesses to share these resources.
The other non-glamorous job that you said you had in the past was carpooling, which is one of those things ironic, right? Because that's
Right.
one of the things that we saw in the last 90 days
Mm.
was for fleets that operated with some vehicles always driving or always on the road, say the car rental associations or the car rental industry, where you might have X number of vehicles, but all those vehicles, or some of them are in your premises, but some of them are out on rent and they're not in your premises. And then all of a sudden this thing happened and cars get returned and you don't have parking for them. Or you're an employer and you say, well, our part of our job is that you come to their warehouse every morning, you drop your personal car off, you get into your work vehicle and you go do your day's job, get back in your personal car and you drive it home. How have you seen or have you had any discussions with just respect to some companies looking at keeping this permanent, take your vehicle and park the work vehicle at home now? Do you see any
Yes.
kind of trend that might be going on, or maybe it's not a trend, at least some early indication of, do you think that there might be some change in the near future here with fleets maybe not wanting people to commute to an office, but rather directly dispatch from their home location?
Yes, absolutely. We heard a lot of that, to be honest. And again, technology is needed because as these people take the vehicles home, which used to go to a central depot, 5:30, all the vehicles were in the parking lot. You knew they were there. Keys were returned. They weren't being used after hours. So of course, now with people taking vehicles home, there is a concern among companies that drivers will use them for personal use, even potentially doing jobs on the side. So technology will help with that, of course. But I do see, and I did hear uh, companies talk about just mobility trends, right? Do we need to give an employee a vehicle? Could we look at car share? Could we look at ride share? What other modes of transportation and mobility can we use so we're not having to, one, pay for parking, two, pay a lease expense for that vehicle and all the maintenance and so forth that goes along with it as well. So fleets are shifting, their mindset. And I tend to see this about every 10 years, we see some big change in the fleet industry. It goes from a sharing type environment to now everybody owns their own assets once again, and it goes back into sharing. I do feel that the trend of car sharing and fleet sharing isn't going to go away. I think that'll become more of the norm and it'll be here to stay. I really do. And technology will be needed to enable that, to ensure that you can reserve the vehicle when you need it, that you can see what vehicles are available to you and when, where they're parked. And someday into the future, when we get into autonomous, right, you'll be able just to summon a vehicle from your phone and have it come and pick you up. So that'll be interesting. That'll be really interesting of how fleet and mobility changes as we get further, 10, 15, 20 years down the road into autonomy. Will be really interesting. But for now, yes, parking is definitely something they consider and they look at, and mobility trends are definitely on the rise.
And I guess in order for, right, maybe it is 10, 15 years in the future, the idea of a fully autonomous vehicle, but that really depends on the car makers themselves. So let's talk about your experience with our connected car program right now and where you see the connected car, which is not an aftermarket device being presented to the vehicle, but rather a vehicle that comes off the factory line with some form of connected data that businesses may want to consume. So let's talk about connected car for a minute, and then let's talk about the peripherals and how we deal with those peripheral devices that fleets also need. But let's start off with connected car. Where do you see, what is the current state, let's say, and here we are again, June 2020, current state of fleet connected car? Where are we at?
I would say current state of fleet connected car right now is embedded systems, sensors, modules. IoT on wheels is what we refer to it as, the Internet of Things. Vehicles are equipped with multiple sensors, and many are not, from the manufacturer, from that logo on the vehicle. They come from tier one suppliers. So I think our struggle today, when we look at this, obviously the cars we're buying today won't be full self-driving autonomy, but they will be a mobile IoT type vehicle with sensors all through it. But the problem where I was going at with that is today, we're not able to access all this data coming from the vehicles. They're not all coming through one central network. So it's a lot of, going out and partnering individually with companies to see if we can get that data directly, and partnering with manufacturers as well. How can we get more of the sensor data coming from vehicles? So although today, we do have connected vehicles, we can get, embedded data coming from these vehicles, from the embedded systems. However, we still can't get all the data. You can't determine today if a driver turned off lane departure warning in a vehicle. We'll get there, right? That's the future. We're going that direction, but unfortunately today it's not there. So although there's Wi-Fi in the vehicles, when we talk about connected vehicles, there are other connectivities, hubs in that vehicle. But again, we're still not today able to get all that information from it. So, we're working towards that. I think that's the future. And I really think that's the key. The more we're able to get all the information coming from the vehicle, it's going to help us with, proactive maintenance rather than being reactive, being more proactive, being more predictive, understanding what's happening, not just with the driver in the vehicle, but what's really happening with that vehicle. And obviously, having access to that sensor data too will enable fleets to, really dissect what happened during a crash. We can do a lot of that today with our Go device and the way that we record data. But sometimes not having that sensor information, you miss some of those critical pieces. So really looking forward to connected cars truly being connected and being able to get that information from the vehicles. It's just not quite there today.
If we talk about, we need to make sure that our OEM partners are providing us with the data that we need, not just the combustion vehicle data, but the electric vehicle data. In addition, when we think of the fleet world, there's also, we have these, we call them IOXs at Geotab, but they're the Bluetooth sensors, the driver ID sensors, the PTO connection for the power takeoff, all kinds of peripheral devices that we want to connect into the vehicle that just don't come off the factory line. So, I think the working relationship, maybe you could sort of describe the future of the working relationship that we have with these connected car manufacturers. And do you find there's a difference between car makers that are focused on fleet versus consumer, and the challenges ahead, because fleet is not really well understood by some of the OEMs?
Yeah, no, great point. And yes, we do see a difference between, more of the consumer type OEMs, manufacturers, versus those that are really focused on, medium and heavy duty trucks, which tend to be all commercial type vehicles. In part because consumers need different things than what a fleet or a business would need to operate. Consumers want more of Wi-Fi for travel. They want to be able to connect to their smart devices in their home. So when their vehicle pulls up, the garage door opens, it can turn on their oven, do all those types of things. Where in a fleet environment, it's really about connecting the vehicle to everything. We want to be able to connect to, our charging grids. If a driver does have an electric vehicle and they take it home, we want to be able to get information to know we need to reimburse that employee, for the energy consumption that they're using at home. So really being able to connect the vehicles and all the sensors from the vehicles as well is going to be critically important. And again, we have a little ways to go before we're there, before we're able to really get all that sensor data from the vehicles. Right now, we are working with manufacturers to try to get that information, but we're also working with the tier one suppliers that make that technology on the vehicles as well. So there's multiple ways that we can try to get this data and this information available to us today. If we can't get it direct from the manufacturer of that vehicle, then again, we can go to those tier one suppliers. Even utility companies are helping us today too to connect those vehicles and get that important information.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's spot on. That's terrific. I think as we look into the next 2 years, I'm interested in a crystal ball, and I'm hoping you have one, Sherry, because I really wish I had one right here, and I could just say, "Oh, that's the future. It's right there. It's written." I think in a lot of ways, we're making our own future right now in the fleet world. We're defining for ourselves the relevancy of fleet and why fleet is important. Certainly, the title fleet manager is important. Has always been important to manage the cost center of field force activity. I'm concerned personally, and I've talked about this on various blog posts and interviews. I'm personally very concerned that the role of fleet manager might just migrate to be a facilities procurement role. And, where is the expertise, and what expertise is being lost? So maybe you could talk about the kind of expertise that you believe exists in a fleet manager today. So many of them in your role from AFLA and the North American fleet. Association as well that you're a long-term member. I'm a long-term member of as well.
Yeah.
Talk about the specific experience that a fleet manager has that will be lost if we don't continue to evolve that title fleet manager themselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's one that, fleet managers struggle with as well. How do I remain relevant, in today's world and what's happening? I'll kind of tie back to where I started. When I initially started in fleet 20 some years ago, you needed to know the dynamics of maintenance of a vehicle, right? You needed to know, all different components that go with maintenance. Today, it's all about data, right? Things have changed. You really need to understand how to interpret data, how to integrate different systems together to give you that contextual data, to really give you that insight. And I think some fleet managers, even some companies, haven't really supported that fully. So if I, have a crystal ball and I'm looking to the future, and if I was talking with fleet managers about where you need to really focus, it would be making sure that you've got access to data of what's happening with your fleet, and not just telematics data, everything around that as well. What's happening with the subrogations? Where's your claims? What about motor vehicle records? Being able to tie all that information together, being able to integrate that data is really going to be key for the future. As I mentioned earlier, everyone is looking at cost-cutting measures, and that's not something that's new. I think fleets are always looking to, tighten the budget, make sure there's no waste, but now more than ever. And data is going to be the enabler for that, and technology is going to be that. So for fleet managers to remain relevant, I think you need to have a seat at the table with leadership. You need to make sure that they understand that these fleet vehicles aren't just a depreciating asset, it's a mobile office. This is how you connect with your customers. This is how you get jobs done. And without having, visibility and information of what's happening through data and through connecting and integrating different systems together, it's really going to be hard to move into the next generation of fleet management. I do think that fleet management will remain and will stay, but to your point about facilities, yeah, it may be more focused around that. I think we're going to start seeing more data centric, big data scientists getting more involved with the fleet aspect and how that relates to safety, decreasing your expenses, CapEx costs, etc. I really do think that understanding how you can use data, interpret data within your organization, and then again having that seat at the table with leadership so they understand it as well is going to be very compelling for the future.
We talked about the importance of leadership, even from policymaking on safety. So it's important
Right.
that having whatever that seat at the table, but also being able to be seen as a subject matter expert in all the data that evolves around the vehicle, but also taking an active interest in safety and policy making for the business. I think, and even electric vehicle policy making, I think
Right.
is relevant.
Yeah. We've talked before too, that the vehicle can actually be a cost driver, right? You can actually create more revenue by, managing your fleet, your vehicles, and your drivers better too. So it's not always, like we said, an expense. It really can be, a driver for revenue in the company as well.
Yeah. Okay. So last crystal ball prediction. We've got, or here we are, and now it's the year, 2022, 2023. All of this is behind us. We're no longer wearing masks when we're driving, and you have the cleanest vehicles around because all of our routine spotless vehicles everywhere we drive. They're going to be completely spotless and sanitized for every single trip because it's just going to be part of our habit. Just give me an idea of whether you can go reflect back on women in fleet management, if you wish, or the idea of an autonomous vehicle or the idea of car sharing, ride sharing. How do you see, or maybe what are maybe the number one and number two things that you really think are going to be influencing what the composition of a fleet looks like in 2 to 3 years from now?
Wow, that's a deep question. It's a great one too. Immediately what comes to mind is electric vehicles. Manufacturers have already come out and said, especially in the sedan segment, 2022, 2023, it's going to be really hard to buy a vehicle that's not electric or a plug-in hybrid. So you really need to understand how you can implement this new electric vehicle technology, electric vehicles into your operation. Where does it make sense? Really doing assessments and looking at your fleet. So electric vehicles are going to be, top of mind. You have to start thinking of that today. If you haven't already. You really need to start thinking of that as a fleet manager. So that would probably be number one. I think number two, it's still going to be around safety. I really do. Seeing what's been trending, even through the COVID, we had less vehicles on the roads, but yet we were having more crashes. People were speeding. We're more distracted today. The infotainment system in the vehicle can even distract you. So there's a lot of things at play. So safety would definitely be another one as well. Whether that's incorporating new technology. Maybe you're not using cameras today. Cameras have been extremely effective in changing that driver behavior and coaching that driver in real time. So implementing new technology to do that, talking with others and networking, as I mentioned earlier. The one great thing about this industry is we really do network together and we share best practices. So talking with other fleets and understanding what they're doing to be the best fleets is really important. But electric vehicle and safety, I think if I had to look through 2022, 2023, those would still be top of mind for almost every organization.
Well, thank you for that. That's super. Thank you very much, Sherry. I want to thank you for your time today and being generous with your time and joining us today. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your mentorship for our women employees that are in our business and also the ones that are in the fleet industry in general. So I just want to thank you for that. And thank you for joining here with yet another episode Connected with Geotab, where I've enjoyed our conversation, but the conversation can keep on, right? We have our blog. You can go to geotab.com/blog or community.geotab.com, where you can feel free. Anyone listening to this podcast can go in and enter a question, and it's a crowdsourced answer. And we curate the answers to find the very, very best answer for you. But we have contributors from around the world that are answering questions that you may have for the fleet community in general. So do pop into community.geotab.com. And with that, I want to thank you for joining. Thank you very much, Sherry, again for your
Thank you.
Today. I look forward to the next time. Thanks again.
You too. Thank you.